Okay, in this video we're going to be going ahead and taking all of the pose information that we have, and we're going to be basically pushing it to this mesh that we got outside of ZBrush, and it's called that T-pose mesh. When we have that pose pushed back over to here, we're going to be able to take this mesh and put it back into ZBrush and then push it to all of our high-res pieces that we have for our sculpt inside of ZBrush and basically get this pose on there. So let's go ahead and take this. I'm going to put him back into the origin and get this part where it needs to be here. I'm going to put my animation on frame 0 to get everything lined back up like this. And the next thing I'm going to have to do is we're going to be using a deformer type called a wrap deformer. Basically, whenever this model animates or goes into its pose, it's moving, and we need to get that that vertex position on the model, and it needs to be pushed down to this thing. So with the wrap deformer, basically what we can do is we can go to rigging, and then we can go to deform and go to wrap deformer. I'm going to open up the option box for that right here, like that. And if I just reset the settings, I believe the type that I'm going to want is this exclusive bind. And from what I understand, this means if you've got two meshes that are exactly the same, all the verts are in the same place, you can use this binding method, and it just looks at the vertex position and binds it one to one, and so it runs really fast. Some of the other methods that are in here kind of can take a while for the computer to calculate. The other thing we need to consider is we've got a bunch of different pieces, and every time we build one of these wrap deformers, each one of these pieces of geometry, like the eyes or the body, is going to be trying to influence this overall mesh that we have. So the way that we get around that is we have to select specific vertices that we want to do this wrap for. So if I go hit F9, I've got this T-pose mesh on here, and if I hit F9, and I've got the body selected like that, so all I did for that was just selected one of the verts, or you can select multiple verts and then grow out that selection. Again, that was shift and then the open bracket or arrow key that's right next to the question mark key on the keyboard, and the decrease one is right next to the M key, so you should be able to find those. That allows you to grow out your selection, and I can just kind of keep tapping that pretty rapidly until I capture everything in the entire mesh. So I've got all the verts selected on this, and then the next thing I need to do is select the piece of geometry that I want these verts in this mesh to be affected by the wrap deformer. So I'll just hold down Control and then click on the body for that. So you can see it's selected, it's green underneath there, and now I can hit Apply for the bind, and we can check this out real quick and see if it's working. So I'll just push this right here like that, and you can see the reason it's drawing this really weird thing is we've got a mesh that's two meshes that are over the top of each other, so it has some Z fighting and stuff like that. So you just know that that mesh is starting to drive it, right? And here's our T-pose mesh, so you can see the eyes aren't going anywhere. Nothing's going anywhere except for the body, so that's starting to work. So then let's go ahead and select this thing again, the T-pose mesh, and then I'll hit F9. Then I'll select the verts in the eyes. So I'll just do a marquee around there like that and grab quite a few of the verts, and then grow the selection, shift, and that open bracket key like that. And then I'll select the eyes and then hit Apply, test it out. Now the eyes are starting to follow along. That's cool. Let's go back to our T-pose mesh. I'm going to select now this part here for these pieces in the arm, and I'm going to try to grab a few verts. If you grab a few verts, it grows the selection out a lot faster. So now I can do that like what we had here, and I missed the bottom piece, so there's some here, and I'll grab some here and then grow that selection like that. And then these are, I believe, called the arm rings like that. I'm gonna hit Apply. Let's check this out and make sure it's moving. Yep, everything's working good. Okay, and I'll go back to this. Let's hit F9 for our verts. Let's just go ahead and we could do the staff. There's a lot in the staff. So I could just select quite a few verts like this, grow out that selection, and it looks like I still need to grab that part. So I'm just holding down Control and Shift. If I want to add to the selection that I've got there, I can do that, and then I can just grow that thing out. And then I'll pick the staff, and I'll hit Apply. You can see the staff is now moving like that. Let's just go ahead and go back to this mesh. We'll hit F9, and let's do something like the backpack. And we can grab a few of the verts here, grow out that selection like that. I'll hold down Control, click the backpack here in the outliner, hit Apply. It's going to check the motion. Everything's going pretty good. Okay, let's go ahead and come back down here, hit F9. I'm going to grab some verts in here for this strap. So I'll grab a few here and a few here like that and grow that selection out like that. And I think I captured everything. And let's see, what did I name these things? These are just the straps, I think. Hit Apply. I'll check the motion on that. Everything's good. So this definitely helps if you've got naming conventions on things. That's going to help you kind of do this kind of stuff a little bit easier. I'm going to hit F9 for this. I guess I'll grab this this decorative thing that he's got for his wrist. It's like his bracelet thing. Let's grow the selection out for that. And I called this wrist ring. Hit Apply. Then everything should be moving for that. That's good. And then this part here, we've got, there's a lot of pieces in this one. If I go ahead and grab the loincloth, part of this saddlebag for this side and this side, and some verts in the back for this loincloth here in the back, like that. And then I have this ring going around and through here, like this. And now I'll just start to grow this out. So if you ever find yourself and it starts to pick the body or something like that, you know that you probably grabbed some verts incorrectly before you did the grow selection part. And you'll just have to go back and redo your selection on that. So let's call this, let's see, this is, I guess I called it pants. So that's moving correctly. So I almost have everything. The only thing that I need to get on here is this necklace part now, and I think that's in a couple different pieces. So let's see here. Yeah, I've got a string for that, the skull, and I do have these straps. I do believe this is another separate piece on the back, so I'll try to make sure I'm grabbing these in some kind of order like this. So I'll do that strap in the back. So I'll grow that out, and I call that neck rest right here, like that, and apply for that. Then I'll go back down here, hit F9, and I can select this string. There's a left side and a right side for that. So I just need to grab one of the verts and grow that out. And there's my necklace string, holding down Control and selecting that, hit Apply. Just check this stuff real quick. Then we've got this skull. I'll hit F9 after I selected the mesh for that. Grow this thing out. Okay. And actually, what I need is this along with this. I put that together. Okay. Now hit Apply like that. And let's test out the motion. And I believe we've got everything is working together now. Now what I could do is I really only need to look at this T-pose mesh now at this point, so I could potentially hide all this. So I could maybe just at least put this thing up here. So I just middle mouse drag the staff up there, so that way I've got everything in the body is together like this, and I can just hide it, and then now I can play my little animation part and check this thing out like that, and just check it. And so everything appears to be moving really well. And so now I'm going to be ready to take this mesh and then export that out into ZBrush. Okay, let's go ahead and take the mesh now that we got this pose transferred to this, and we'll go ahead and select this T-pose body, and let's go ahead and say File, and we'll say Export Selection. Let's just use the option box for this, and let's just go ahead and to use the OBJ export type. I'll export everything except for materials. I don't need to worry about materials, so I'll say Export Selection like this, and it should open up some dialog box for us. Okay, let's go ahead and just navigate to where you want to save this thing off at. Okay, I've navigated to where I want to save this thing off at, and I'm going to give this a name at the end of this. So it was T-pose underscore one fling body, but I'm going to put this underscore pose and just do V1 for like a version 1 and say export selection like that. So now we can go and we can hop on over, back on over to ZBrush, and then if we go back to our transpose master and we go to the actual mesh that it made for the this T-pose mesh, we can say select that mesh and go import, and we can find the model for this thing and import it in. Before I do that, if I want to hold this position, I know I can go down to the morph target area, and I can just say store morph target, and it'll at least store this position for us in the neutral position. We already saved that off as an OBJ anyways, so we could always get back to that, but just in case if you ever want to switch back to this neutral thing, you could store that first. And then now if we go and import and we find this thing here with the T-pose fling body, and then this is the pose, the version 1. So here you can see we've got our new mesh just imported in, and here's the pose that we made. So just a real quick side note, just in case you're importing or exporting things in and out of ZBrush and the orientation is not correct on that, you might want to go ahead and check your preferences and say to go to preferences. Let's dock this over side of here, and you can see there's an import export, and there's an import area and export. And if you need to flip anything, you might need to flip like I flip Y, I flip Z, or something like that, and maybe the export, same thing for that. So you just need to figure out what's the correct orientation to make sure everything's going and moving back and forth between ZBrush and Maya correctly. So if you need to change those, go ahead and do that. And then after you do these changes and it's set up the way that you want, just go to config and say store config, and then that will always load up those configurations with in ZBrush. Now if we want to transfer this over to all of our different pieces, I'm going to use this button right here called layer, and it's basically going to take any of this pose information and it's going to make a new layer for each one of our pieces that we have and store that motion on a layer, which is kind of cool because you can just turn that layer on and off. So if you ever want to get it back to your neutral pose, it's going to be pretty easy for you to do that. So once this is turned on, all we have to do is say T-pose to subtools, click that. Okay, here's the results after it's done. And if it was asking that you find an actual T-pose mesh, let me explain what maybe happened to you and how I went about fixing that. So if you save the project and you go outside of ZBrush and you come back and then you still had one of these models still associated with it for the pose, it might not recognize that that's your T-pose mesh anymore, but you don't really have to worry because we've already saved out that work. All I had to do was go back to my original model and then click this T-pose mesh and make sure all the the parts were visible, just like what we did before with last time. So I just had everything visible, same steps we did before, and we make a new T-pose mesh, and then we can go through that import process, just like what we looked at, and import the mesh in, and then click that T-pose to subtool, and it pushes everything over. So that's if you just don't get the work done all in one session, then you don't really need to worry about it. But again, when we created this stuff, remember we clicked on the layer button here. So basically what that allows us to do is let me select the body. So if I hold on Alt and click on that, it's going to actually draw and select that subtool, and it's telling me that that mesh has it has layers, so it's not going to let me edit it. So if we go to the layers area, let me go ahead and click and open layers, and you can see that there's this untitled layer. It doesn't name it for you, unfortunately. You can name it if you wanted, and you can just call it something like pose 01, something like that, and hit enter. And if you want to do any edits to this, you can click this little record icon, and now you can put it on, say, like the move brush or something like that, and we can start to move this. The cool thing is, any changes that we do is actually being pushed onto this layer, and so it's not destructive to our mesh in any kind of way. We could drop down in subdivision levels, and you can see that if this needs to be smoothed out a little bit, you can still work with everything at that point. Let me go ahead and sorry, and maybe if I just hold down Shift and do this here like that just a little bit. I'm just going to smooth it out just a little bit, and maybe move this piece up just a little bit here like that, and just tweak it. And maybe I wanted to fix the shoulders, right? So the thing that we did in Maya is not going to get you 100% the way there, because you're working on a low res version of this thing, and then whenever you transfer it, it transfers all that motion and tries to move the high res sculpt of yours. And so for the most part it works out pretty good, but there might be some stuff that you definitely want to grab a hold of and finesse. If you had a model and you wanted to do maybe some 3D printing and stuff like that, I know people that I've seen that are professionals at that particular job. They like to just pose the mesh, and then during the sculpting stage, and so they're not big fans of this moving the thing after the fact. But if you're in a production pipeline where you're working on a game or some other type of thing, or a short film or something like that, you might want to use your production asset and then turn that into something that you would use for a digital print or something like that. So I still think this process is valid, but you probably just need to do a lot of work after the fact. After you build this pose and you push it over, there's going to be probably a lot of cleanup work that needs to be done on this. And just particular areas like that, you might have to fix some stuff up or whatever. And I didn't actually have the inside of the mouth even like really sculpted up and painted, so that would give you a new opportunity where if you really wanted to make this pose awesome, you would have to sit there and do some additional work on that. And so other areas that I know didn't turn out so well for me is back here on this loincloth area, and I'm going to have to turn back on the visibility of the body so I can see that. And all these pieces, again, each one of the pieces is going to have a layer associated with it, so I can always go back and name that, like I said before, call it pose 01, and then turn on the recording abilities for that, and then now I can start to manipulate this thing and tweak it and make it fit and make sure it's working correctly. The other thing to note is that I've got poly painting information on this, and so I'm going to have to be really careful if I smooth out. So if I hold down Shift and I smooth, probably going to want to turn off RGB. I don't want it to really affect any of the poly painting information just something else that you might think about if there's poly painting data on the mesh itself. And again, there's definitely some areas on here that I would need to fix up. So if I go to strap, pose 01 like that, I'll put it in recording mode. And if I set up a hotkey for myself for this solo so I can hit Alt S and see stuff pretty quickly. I might be taking some of this information and just pushing it into the mesh to get the correct intersection that I'm looking for to make it feel like those pieces are attached. Kind of like that. Maybe just pulling some of this stuff down. So again, it's just taking a look at what did that pose do for you? How did it take the high-res mesh and move it around? And are the results acceptable for you, or do you need to kind of tweak this stuff just a little bit? And I could, at this point, I'll turn the other elements on. I have some other things within the scene. Let me go ahead and grab this real quick and just try to, there we go, hitting Alt and picking on it. Just gonna finesse this thing just a little bit more. Trying to even out some of this detail work. So it might actually make more sense, instead of moving it at this high-res area, if I drop down to the lower subdivision levels and maybe fix some of that stuff there at that stage. Try to get rid of some of this. There's a bit of warping and things like that happening with this. And to a certain degree, you just can't avoid this, you know. It's just going to happen whenever a mesh moves around. But as I step up into my subdivision levels, then you can see maybe I only have to do some minor tweaks to the mesh at that point. Like that, and I'll step all the way up in this. And so then when we're done, we can take a look and then maybe do a best possible render on this thing. And so the default options for a BPR render are pretty good. Maybe I like this pose or something like that. I could save this pose under texture. There's under image plane. If you go to reference views, you could actually store something in here. I'm just set to this front camera, so I could say store view, and then you could click any view that you wanted in here. So say that's not really my front, but I can go, let's click a back view, something like this, right? Maybe I wanted to store this as my back view. Something like this. I'll just say store view. And this stuff actually will save with the project, which is pretty cool. So I've got it in position. Now I'll just hit BPR, the best possible render, or hit Shift R. And this will do a better render for us. But you can see, I know this process is pretty involved, but again, this is, it's a lot of work to actually pose your mesh. So if you want to do it quickly and you're going to do it a one-off, you might want to use the Transpose Master just directly inside of ZBrush and using the Transpose tools that they have within here. But if you're going to do something and you have a production pipeline kind of set up and you're working with multiple people and you're already going to have a skeleton, why not leverage the strength of the work that you're already doing in another program like Maya and then still be able to push that and push it onto all your high-res pieces. Then that way you could use it for marketing renders and all kinds of cool stuff like that at that point.